Emma stood in front of the full-length mirror, adjusting the elegant red dress she had chosen for the evening. The fabric hugged her frame perfectly, shimmering slightly under the light, and the plunging neckline added an air of sophistication and allure. She smiled at her reflection, smoothing out the last of the non-existent wrinkles. James, sitting on the edge of their bed, observed her silently. He couldn't deny how stunning she looked, yet there was a knot of unease forming in his stomach. It wasn't just the dress or the meticulous care she had taken in her appearance tonight. It was something intangible, something in her demeanor. She seemed unusually giddy, a barely contained excitement that didn't quite feel like it was about her friend Sophie's party, as she claimed. "You look beautiful," James finally said, his voice tinged with both admiration and subtle wariness. Emma turned to him, her smile widening. "Thank you. Sophie said it's going to be a formal event, so I thought I'd dress the part." He nodded, though her explanation did little to quell the odd feeling gnawing at him. Sophie was a close friend of Emma's, but he couldn't recall her ever hosting a party of this supposed grandeur before. He also couldn't remember Emma ever being this enthusiastic about attending one. Normally, she was content to dress casually for social gatherings, preferring comfort over glamour. "Do you want me to drop you off?" James offered, his tone casual but probing. "No need," Emma replied quickly, almost too quickly. "I'll take an Uber. You don't have to worry about picking me up either. It might go late, and I wouldn't want to disturb your sleep." James raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. It wasn't unusual for her to be considerate, but the sudden insistence on taking an Uber and not wanting him involved felt calculated. Still, he pushed the thought aside, not wanting to jump to conclusions. "All right," he said, forcing a smile. "Have fun." Emma grabbed her clutch and gave him a quick peck on the cheek before heading out the door. The faint scent of her perfume lingered in the air long after she was gone, a scent he hadn't smelled in months, one she had once said was reserved for special occasions. James sat in the now empty room, the faint sound of the door clicking shut echoing in his ears. He reached for his phone, scrolling absent-mindedly through social media. It wasn't long before his thoughts drifted back to Emma and the peculiar energy she had exuded all evening. Something about it just didn't sit right. Hours passed. James tried to occupy himself, watching a game, tidying up the living room, even attempting to read. But his focus kept wandering. He checked the time. Midnight. Then 1 a.m. Emma still hadn't returned. He texted her, "Hey, everything okay?" The message went unread, adding to his growing unease. James wasn't the type to pry, but as the clock ticked past 2, his concern began morphing into suspicion. Memories of the past weeks bubbled to the surface. Her increased time on her phone, the hushed conversations she claimed were work calls, and the vague explanations about her sudden evening outings. When Emma finally walked through the door close to 3 a.m, her hair slightly tousled and her makeup smudged, James was sitting on the couch, waiting. She froze for a moment upon seeing him, clearly not expecting him to still be awake. "You're up late," she said, forcing a casual tone as she placed her clutch on the table. James studied her, his gaze unwavering. "Yeah, I couldn't sleep." Emma avoided his eyes, instead busying herself with taking off her heels. "The party ran longer than I expected." "Sophie really outdid herself?" "Did she?" James asked, his tone neutral but sharp. "What kind of party was it?" Emma hesitated for just a fraction of a second, but it was enough for James to notice. "Oh, you know, the usual, dancing, some wine, catching up with everyone. Must have been a great time if you stayed out this late," he remarked, his words laced with a quiet edge. Emma glanced at him, her expression guarded. "The was. Anyway, I'm exhausted. I'm just going to head to bed." She started toward the bedroom, but James's voice stopped her in her tracks. She turned slowly, the tension between them palpable. "Why didn't you reply to my text?" he asked, holding up his phone. Emma's lips parted, but no words came immediately. After a moment, she forced a sheepish smile. "I must not have seen it. My phone was probably in my bag." James nodded, though his expression remained unreadable. "That makes sense." But it didn't. Not entirely. He had seen how attached she was to her phone, how she rarely let it leave her side. Yet here she was, claiming she hadn't checked it for hours. Emma shifted uncomfortably under his scrutiny. "James, what's this about?" "Nothing," he replied, his tone calm but deliberate. "Just curious." "Okay," Emma said, her voice tinged with irritation now. "I'm going to bed." James watched her retreat, his mind racing. The elegant dress, the late return, the evasive answers. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle he couldn't quite fit together. He didn't have proof of anything yet, but the seed of doubt had been firmly planted. The morning sunlight filtered through the bedroom curtains, casting long shadows on the floor as James stirred awake. The empty spot beside him in the bed was cold, indicating that Emma had risen earlier than usual. As he sat up, the unease from the previous night weighed heavily on his chest, a nagging sense that something wasn't right. James glanced at the nightstand, where Emma's phone lay untouched. She rarely left it behind, and he knew she guarded it fiercely. The thought struck him like a thunderbolt. This was his chance. Hesitation gripped him for a moment. The boundary he was about to cross felt monumental. But the shadow of doubt and suspicion was far more unbearable than any guilt he might feel for invading her privacy. He reached for the phone, his hands trembling. To his relief, there was no passcode. It had been disabled months ago after she'd claimed it was too much trouble to unlock all the time. That small detail, once insignificant, now felt deliberate. The home screen was ordinary enough. A picture of the two of them from a vacation years ago. His thumb hovered over the messaging app, and with a deep breath, he tapped it open. Emma's conversations were listed in neat rows. Most were innocuous: family, Sophie, colleagues, but one name stood out: Ryan. The name alone wouldn't have raised his suspicion under normal circumstances, but the sheer volume of messages between them was impossible to ignore. His pulse quickened as he clicked on the thread. The first few messages seemed harmless, work-related even. But as James scrolled further, his stomach dropped. The tone of the conversation shifted abruptly, becoming casual, then flirtatious. James's vision blurred momentarily. He scrolled faster, his heart hammering in his chest. The messages painted a picture he desperately didn't want to see: a shared history of secret meetings, late-night confessions, and mutual declarations of a connection he hadn't even known existed. "I'll find an excuse to leave early next week. Can't wait to see you again. You know I hate sneaking around, but there's no other way right now." James clenched his jaw, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the phone. His mind raced with questions. Who was Ryan? How long had this been going on? Was she ever planning to tell him, or had she simply hoped he'd remain oblivious? The messages didn't stop there. James scrolled to the most recent exchange, sent just after 2 a.m. the previous night, confirming his worst fears. The words hit him like a physical blow, knocking the wind from his lungs. He set the phone down on the bed, staring at it as though it were some vile creature. He felt a mix of emotions swirling within him: rage, betrayal, humiliation. The woman he'd built his life around, the person he trusted most, had been living a double life right under his nose. Footsteps approached the bedroom, pulling him back to reality. Emma appeared in the doorway, a cup of coffee in hand. Her smile faltered when she saw the phone in his hand, her eyes darting between his face and the screen. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice sharp with alarm. James met her gaze, his own filled with cold fury. "Who is Ryan?" Emma froze, her face draining of color. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The silence between them stretched painfully, a gaping chasm filled with unspoken truths. "Answer me, Emma," James demanded, his voice rising. "Who is he? How long has this been going on?" Emma placed the coffee cup on the dresser with shaky hands, her composure unraveling before his eyes. "It's not what you think," she stammered, her tone unconvincing. "Not what I think?" James repeated, his voice dripping with disbelief. He held up the phone, the damning messages glaring from the screen. "So these aren't what they look like? You weren't with him last night?" Emma's lips parted, but no denial came. Instead, tears welled up in her eyes as she muttered, "I'm sorry." James laughed bitterly, the sound devoid of humor. "Sorry? That's it? That's all you have to say after lying to my face, sneaking around, making a fool out of me?" Emma stepped closer, reaching out as though to comfort him, but he recoiled, the gesture cutting deeper than her words ever could. "Don't," he warned, his voice trembling with barely contained anger. "Don't you dare touch me." Her tears spilled over, and she sank onto the edge of the bed, burying her face in her hands. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she choked out. It got out of control." "Got out of control?" James repeated, his voice rising again. "You think that excuses what you've done? You've humiliated me, Emma. Do you have any idea what it feels like to sit here, night after night, wondering why my wife is sneaking out? To see you glowing for someone else, knowing that glow was never for me? I didn't mean to hurt you," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never wanted you to find out." The admission only deepened James's sense of betrayal. "So that's it? You were just going to keep lying until when? Until you got caught? Until you decided Ryan was worth leaving me for?" Emma's sobs grew louder, but James felt no sympathy. He paced the room, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on him like a suffocating fog. "Does he know you're married? Does he care?" "James, please," Emma begged, her voice cracking. "I made a mistake." "No," he shot back, his voice cutting like a blade. "A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk at the store. What you did was a choice, a series of choices. Don't try to dress it up as anything else." For a moment, the room was filled only with the sound of Emma's muffled cries and James's heavy breathing. The life they had built together, the years of love and trust, now felt like a cruel joke. Finally, James stopped pacing, turning to face her. His voice, though quieter now, was no less firm. "You need to leave," he said, the finality in his tone leaving no room for argument. Emma looked up, her tear-streaked face a portrait of devastation. "Leave?" she echoed, her voice trembling. "Where am I supposed to go?" "To Ryan, for all I care," James replied coldly. "You've made your bed, Emma. Go lie in it." She tried to plead with him, but he refused to listen, every word she spoke only deepening his resolve. The woman he had once adored now felt like a stranger, her betrayal a wound too deep to ignore. As Emma gathered her things, James watched silently, his heart a storm of emotions. When the door finally closed behind her, the house was plunged into an eerie silence. James sat alone, the weight of the morning's revelations settling heavily on his shoulders. The betrayal was fresh, the pain unbearable, but one thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same. James sat at the dining table, his jaw clenched and his hands pressed firmly against the smooth surface. Across from him, Emma sat in stiff silence, her eyes darting around the room, avoiding his. The atmosphere was electric with tension, and the weight of unspoken words hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. "Emma," James began, his voice steady but laced with a cold edge, "we need to talk. And I need the truth. No more lies." Emma's head snapped up at his words, her face pale. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said quickly, her voice defensive. James's gaze hardened. He slid her phone across the table toward her, the screen glowing with the damning messages between her and Ryan. "Don't insult my intelligence. I read everything. I know about you and Ryan." Emma's lips parted in shock, and for a moment, she was speechless. Her hand reached instinctively for the phone, but she stopped short, as though the device burned her. "James, it's not," she started, her voice shaking. "It's not what it looks like." James let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Not what it looks like. Spare me, Emma. You've been sneaking around with him for months. And you've been lying to my face every step of the way." Emma's face flushed, a mix of panic and guilt. "You don't understand," she stammered. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "Then explain it to me," James demanded, leaning forward. "Explain how you accidentally carried on an affair with someone else. Explain how you managed to betray me over and over again without meaning to." Emma's hands trembled as she clasped them together on the table. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The silence stretched unbearably until James's patience snapped. "Answer me," he shouted, slamming his fist onto the table, causing her to jump. "How long has this been going on?" Emma flinched, her eyes filling with tears. She took a shaky breath before whispering, 8 months? The admission hung in the air like a thunderclap, the final nail in the coffin of their marriage. James sat back in his chair, his face a mask of disbelief. 8 months, he repeated, his voice hollow. 8 months of lying, sneaking around, and making me feel like I was crazy for suspecting anything. It wasn't like that, Emma said weakly. I didn't plan for it to happen. It just did. James's laughter this time was sharp and cutting. It just did? That's your excuse? You just happened to fall into an affair for nearly a year? Do you even hear yourself? Emma wiped at her tears, her expression a mixture of shame and desperation. I'm sorry, James. I know I hurt you, but it wasn't all bad. We were having problems and… Don't you dare blame this on me, James interrupted, his voice low and menacing. Whatever issues we had, you had a choice, Emma. You could have talked to me. You could have worked on it with me. Instead, you decided to throw everything away for him. Emma's tears flowed freely now, but James felt no sympathy. He stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman sitting before him with the person he thought he knew. Who is he, Emma? He asked finally. What makes him worth all this? Emma hesitated, as if unsure how much to reveal. He's someone from work, she admitted reluctantly. We started talking during a project and one thing led to another. It wasn't supposed to go this far. James's fists clenched at his sides. The betrayal cut even deeper now. So, he's someone you see every day? Someone who gets the version of you I haven't seen in months? Is that it? Emma didn't respond, her silence speaking louder than any words could. James pushed back his chair and stood, towering over her. Pack your things, he said, his tone final. You're leaving? Emma's eyes widened in shock. James, wait. No, he cut her off sharply. You don't get to wait. You don't get to plead or make excuses. You made your choices, Emma, and now you can deal with the consequences. I want you out of this house. Where am I supposed to go? She asked, her voice rising in panic. I don't have anywhere else. Go to Ryan, James said coldly. He's your partner now, isn't he? Let him deal with you. Emma's tears turned into sobs, but James stood firm, his resolve unshaken. He watched as she stumbled to the bedroom, her shoulders shaking as she began to gather her belongings. The sight didn't move him. If anything, it hardened his heart further. As Emma packed, James paced the living room, his mind replaying every moment of the past 8 months in excruciating detail. Every late-night meeting she claimed was with Sophie, every cold shoulder and distant look. It all made sense now. He felt like a fool for not seeing it sooner. When Emma reappeared, a suitcase in hand, she looked at him with pleading eyes. James, please, can we talk about this? I don't want to lose you. You lost me the moment you decided I wasn't enough, James said, his voice devoid of emotion. There's nothing left to talk about. Emma hesitated, as though hoping he might change his mind. But James's expression remained resolute, and she finally turned toward the door. The sound of the suitcase wheels dragging across the floor echoed painfully in the silent house. As the door closed behind her, James collapsed onto the couch, his head in his hands. The house felt unbearably quiet, the absence of her presence both a relief and a void. He stared at the phone still sitting on the dining table, the messages glaring back at him like an open wound. For a long time, James sat there, letting the weight of the betrayal wash over him. He knew there was no going back, no undoing the damage that had been done. The life he thought he had, the love he believed in, was gone. All that remained now was the hollow echo of what once was. James stared at Emma's abandoned phone on the dining table, its screen dark but still a damning repository of her betrayal. The pain from her departure was fresh, but as the hours passed, a cold anger began to take root. He couldn't erase the humiliation of being blindsided, the degradation of discovering his wife's lies, or the ache of her admission. But he could do something about it. He could make sure Ryan paid for his part in the betrayal. James unlocked Emma's phone again and returned to the messages. Scrolling further back, he uncovered even more details of their affair, secret rendezvous, inside jokes, and thinly veiled mockery of him. His hands shook with rage as he read a message from Ryan that sent his blood boiling. Does he even suspect anything? Poor guy. Must be clueless. James gritted his teeth, his vision narrowing with a burning sense of vengeance. He wasn't going to let this slide. Ryan had played a role in wrecking his life, and James would ensure he felt the consequences. He scrolled up through their conversations until he stumbled upon a reference to Olivia, Ryan's girlfriend. James didn't know much about Olivia, but the messages revealed enough. Ryan had casually mentioned her multiple times, often complaining about how she was boring or too clingy. The irony of Ryan's disdain for his own partner while pursuing someone else's wife only fueled James's determination. He opened Facebook on his laptop and began searching for Olivia. It didn't take long. Ryan's profile was public, and Olivia was tagged in several of his posts. She was beautiful, with a warm smile that belied the pain she was unknowingly living through. James felt a pang of sympathy for her. She deserved to know the truth. After a moment's hesitation, he clicked on the message button and began typing. "Hi Olivia, you don't know me, but I think it's important that you hear this from me. I'm James, Emma's husband. I'm reaching out because I've discovered that Ryan and Emma have been having an affair for the past 8 months. I have evidence, and I think you deserve to see it. Please let me know if you're willing to talk." He reread the message twice before hitting send. The hours that followed were agonizingly slow. James stayed up, unable to sleep, refreshing the chat window repeatedly. Around midnight, a notification appeared. Olivia had replied. "What are you talking about? I don't believe you. Ryan would never do that." James sighed, understanding her disbelief. He replied with screenshots of the most incriminating messages, each one time-stamped and irrefutable. He hesitated before sending the last screenshot, a photo of Ryan and Emma together, taken in what looked like a hotel room mirror. That image spoke volumes. Minutes passed, then Olivia responded. "Oh my God. I don't even know what to say." James typed back. "I'm sorry to be the one to tell you. I've been blindsided too. I just thought you deserved to know." The chat went silent for a while, and James wondered if Olivia would simply cut off contact. But then another message popped up. "Thank you for telling me. I'm not going to let him get away with this." James wasn't sure what she meant, but he felt a flicker of satisfaction. Whatever Olivia had planned, it was clear Ryan wouldn't emerge from this unscathed. 2 days later, James's phone buzzed with notifications. He opened Instagram to find that Olivia had made her move. Her profile, once filled with cheerful photos of her and Ryan, had transformed into a battleground. Her most recent post was a picture of Ryan, smiling at some event, with a scathing caption. "This man, Ryan, last name, is a liar, a cheater, and a fraud. For the past 8 months, he's been having an affair with a married woman. Here's the proof. Ladies, this is the man who claims to love and respect you while betraying you behind your back. Don't let him fool you." The post included multiple screenshots of the messages James had shared, as well as a detailed account of her confrontation with Ryan. Olivia didn't hold back, tagging Ryan's workplace and several mutual acquaintances. The comments section was a frenzy. "What a scumbag. I can't believe I ever trusted him. Does his company know about this? Someone needs to tell them." Olivia had even gone as far as to share the story on TikTok, where it quickly gained traction. Clips of her reading the messages aloud, her voice trembling with anger, were interspersed with photos of Ryan and Emma together. The betrayal was laid bare for the world to see, and the fallout was immediate. By midday, James received an email from an unknown address. It was Ryan. "James, we need to talk. I don't know what you told Olivia, but she's completely blowing this out of proportion. My reputation is ruined because of you. I'll lose my job if this continues. Please, let's handle this like adults." James didn't reply. He didn't feel any obligation to help Ryan salvage the mess he'd created. Instead, he forwarded the email to Olivia, who responded with a curt message. "Don't worry, I've got this." The next day, Ryan's employer released a statement. "We are aware of the allegations against Mr. Ryan, last name. Effective immediately, he is no longer associated with our company." Ryan's social media accounts were flooded with condemnation, and within hours, he deactivated them entirely. The man who had once smugly mocked James in private messages was now a pariah, his life and career in shambles. Emma didn't remain unscathed either. Word of the affair spread quickly among their social circle. Friends and family who had once admired her were now distant, their judgment clear in every brief, awkward interaction. Her attempts to defend herself were met with skepticism, and she found herself increasingly isolated. For James, the sense of justice was bittersweet. The betrayal still stung, and the wounds left by Emma's actions would take time to heal. But knowing that neither she nor Ryan could simply move on unscathed provided a small measure of solace. In the end, James knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he felt lighter knowing he had taken a stand. Ryan and Emma's actions had left scars, but they had also revealed the strength James didn't know he possessed. He would rebuild his life, one piece at a time, leaving their betrayal behind him. James sat across from his lawyer in the dimly lit office, a folder of damning evidence on the desk between them. The screenshots of Emma's affair, the timeline of her deceit, and even Olivia's viral exposé of Ryan were meticulously compiled. His lawyer, a seasoned professional with a reputation for unflinching precision, adjusted his glasses and offered a grim smile. "With this much evidence, James, we have the upper hand," the lawyer said confidently. "She won't be able to contest much. You're entitled to everything you've asked for." James nodded, his expression stoic. The weight of betrayal still pressed on him, but this was a moment of clarity. He was finally taking control of the chaos Emma had brought into his life. The divorce proceedings began swiftly, and James was relentless in his pursuit of fairness. Not revenge, just justice. His lawyer ensured that the terms would leave Emma with little to stand on. The house, which James had paid for almost entirely, would remain his. Her claims to shared savings were undermined by her actions, documented so thoroughly that even her attorney struggled to defend her. When Emma appeared at the first mediation session, she looked frazzled, her once confident demeanor replaced by unease. Her friends had begun distancing themselves after the affair became public knowledge. Even Sophie, who had initially supported her, had started avoiding her calls. "James," Emma said softly during a break, her voice trembling. "Can we talk?" "There's nothing to talk about," James replied curtly, not even looking at her. "But this is all moving so fast," she pleaded. "I need time to figure things out." "You had 8 months to figure things out, Emma," James said, his tone cold. "Now you get to live with the consequences of your choices." Her lawyer pulled her aside, and James watched as they spoke in hushed tones. It was clear that Emma was beginning to realize how dire her situation was. Outside the courtroom, Emma's life was unraveling at an alarming pace. The fallout from her affair with Ryan had left her socially ostracized. Word had spread among their mutual friends, and she found herself excluded from gatherings she had once been the center of. Sophie, the friend who had unknowingly hosted many of Emma's secret rendezvous with Ryan, had turned on her. "You humiliated James," Sophie had said when Emma tried to reach out. "I can't support what you've done." Emma's other close friend, Hannah, had initially allowed Emma to stay at her house after James had kicked her out. But as Emma's presence brought nothing but drama and discomfort, Hannah's patience wore thin. One evening, after another tense argument, Hannah finally snapped. "Emma, you need to leave," she said, her voice firm. "What? Why?" The mouth shut. "Because I can't do this anymore," Hannah replied. "You've brought chaos into my life. Everyone's talking about what you did, and I'm done being dragged into it." "Hannah, please," Emma begged. "I have nowhere else to go." "That's not my problem," Hannah said sharply. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you blew up your marriage." Emma left that night, dragging her suitcase through the streets with tears streaming down her face. She called Ryan, hoping for a lifeline, but his number had been disconnected. Olivia's public exposé had ruined him professionally and personally, and he had vanished, leaving Emma to face the consequences alone. The final divorce hearing was quick, a mere formality after Emma's lawyer advised her not to contest the terms. She sat silently as the judge finalized the agreement. James retained the house, the majority of their savings, and even some personal items Emma had left behind. The humiliation was palpable, and she avoided looking at him as the gavel came down. Outside the courthouse, James felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, certainly, but also a lingering sadness. This wasn't how he had imagined his marriage ending. Still, he knew he had made the right decision. Emma, on the other hand, left the courthouse with nothing but the clothes on her back and the few belongings she had managed to salvage. Her attempts to rebuild her life were met with one obstacle after another. Potential employers hesitated to hire her after learning about the scandal, and her once vibrant social life was in shambles. A few weeks later, James received a letter in the mail from Emma. It was handwritten, the penmanship shaky, as though she had written it in a moment of desperation. James, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I need you to know how sorry I am. Losing you has been the hardest thing I've ever faced, and I don't blame you for any of this. I ruined everything. I understand if you never want to speak to me again, but I needed to say this. Emma. James folded the letter and placed it in a drawer without responding. He had no intention of rekindling any connection with her, but he found a small measure of closure in her words. As the months passed, Emma faded from his thoughts, and James focused on rebuilding his life. He threw himself into work, reconnected with friends, and even began therapy to work through the pain of the betrayal. Meanwhile, Emma struggled to find stability. With no support system and no one willing to trust her, she was forced to move to a smaller city and take on a low-paying job just to survive. Her downfall was complete, a stark contrast to the life she had once enjoyed. For James, the scars of betrayal remained, but they no longer defined him. He had emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever came next. Emma's choices had cost her everything, while James had gained a renewed sense of purpose and resilience. The life he was rebuilding, though forged from pain, was his alone, a testament to his strength and resolve.